Good day, everybody. I hope everyone who is joining us here is having a great day. For those of you who are here live with me today, I would really appreciate if you take just a second and drop in the chat and let me know if my audio feed is coming across okay. Let me know if you can see the camera just fine. I'm specifically interested on the audio, letting me know if it's cutting in and out. I'm looking at my I'm looking at the feed that I'm getting back from me, and I'm not sure if the audio and the video is out of sync or not. I thought I fixed everything. Now I'm not entirely sure. I just did a webinar for the European SharePoint conference, and for the first 20 minutes before the webinar started, they could not hear me except every other word. I think it was a GoToMeeting issue. Because everything on my side shows that the connection was great. So we frantically had to pull out my laptop and do my presentation from there, where of course the demos weren't here. And so I couldn't do any demos. I could just kind of show, I could just kind of talk a little about what we had. So everything is synced up. Awesome. Savvy, thank you very much for both those comments. That helps. That definitely helps, puts me at ease. I probably made a mistake in letting the scheduling of that happen the way I did, but it is what it is. I can't change it, and oh well. So I can tell you that was a little frantic this morning. Okay, I'm really excited about today's office hours. I'm really excited, and I'm a little. I almost wish that this office hours was coming like a little bit later in the week or something, because I've got a lot of stuff that I'm really looking forward to sharing with everyone. But I can't do that yet because I'm kind of waiting for something else to happen. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen until, well, I can't say when. This is happening a little bit earlier. So got to keep my mouth shut for just a little bit. And if you're watching this live and you're like, don't you normally send a newsletter out on Tuesday, every other Tuesday? And the answer is yes. And it's waiting for me to hit publish. It's all written and ready to go. You'll see when the newsletter goes out, though, why I'm having to wait on some stuff. So it's coming. I'm keeping an eye on something else on the screen off to the side to see if I can talk about it at all. But for now, I can't. So sorry about that. That's okay. We're still going to have a good time today. At least I hope we are. So really quick, for those of you who are new here, my name is Andrew Connell. Thank you very much for joining me today during my monthly office hours. These are the Microsoft 365 developer office hours, full stack developer. So this is primarily for developers who are, Microsoft calls it code first. Some people call it pro code. I hate that term because it really implies that people who are not professional developers, that you're not welcome. It's not the case. Anyway, this is for full stack developers. And I define full stack developer as you traditionally build client-side or front-end based solutions like web apps. You develop client-side solutions, and then you also understand how to build all of the stuff that supports that. So that would be client server-side solutions like APIs or using CDNs or stuff like that. So that's the general definition of a full-stack developer, and that's why I've kind of adopted it, or that's why I've adopted it for a lot of this stuff. This includes SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Embedded, you name it. So I've been doing this SharePoint development stuff for a very long time. In fact, I just got my little 20-year, let's see if I can get that, there we go, it was there. My 20-year hockey puck that goes on my crystal that I'll put on later. It literally just showed up this morning, so I haven't been able to even turn around yet with the other presentation I was doing today. I've been doing SharePoint development going all the way back to September of 2003 and been living in the Microsoft 365 space before it was called Microsoft 365, when it was still Office 365. So my background is long background in SharePoint development, doing all the different development models. But I also do things like SharePoint Framework, spend a lot of time there, Microsoft Teams app development, anything that you need to be able to facilitate those apps. So calling Microsoft Graph, using resources in Microsoft Azure, Microsoft Intra ID. I've done a bunch of work with SharePoint Embedded, doing a lot more stuff with Copilot, customizations and extensibility there. Really curious if you've got questions about Copilot extensibility, really curious if there's like what kind, who, if anybody is doing stuff with Copilot from a developer point of view or extending it, or you're interested in it, please leave a message in the chat, as I'd love to connect with you and find out what you're doing. Hint, hint. Let's see, a couple other things. I'm also the founder of Voitanos, which is where I do all of my training, all my teaching related to Microsoft 365 development based topics. Okay, this is office hours. So let me talk a little bit here about what I like to do during these office hours for those of you who are new. Those of you who've been here before, old hat, you understand all that stuff. I can tell you, let me just explain this in the order that I like to go through this in. I have a couple things that I want to touch on about SharePoint. There's a little bit of Microsoft Teams stuff that I want to touch on as well. Some issues that I've been seeing recently in the developer space that are being fixed, have been fixed, are being fixed, things are running into. Same thing on the SharePoint Framework side. And then the rest of it is office hours. The rest of it is time for you to ask your questions and get answers. I've had 2 questions that were submitted ahead of time. One was by Savvy, which you've been very patient. You submitted this about a month ago, right after, I think the same day as we finished our office hours back in September. So I've got your answer to your question. I believe I have an answer to your question based on how you asked it. And then I have another question from, I believe it was Michael V, I think, who asked it sometime in the last couple of days about Microsoft Graph middleware. And so I can talk a little bit about that as well. I think I got an answer for you there. If you have a question though, so those are the only 2 questions I had submitted ahead of time. If you have a question, let me pop open Discord to make sure that, see if anybody's asked any questions there that I've missed. Nope. It looks like there's no questions that I've missed. So if you have a question, as I go through this stuff today, please post it in the chat, in the live stream, and I will answer your question after I answer the other people's questions at the one who's, after I answer the 2 questions that were submitted ahead of time, I will then answer all the questions that we get in the chat. Hope that sounds good. If not, we're on a little bit of a time delay, so I'll find out in about 15 seconds. All right, so let's start off with the SharePoint. Let's start off with my agenda here of what is new in, or what do I want to talk about with SharePoint Framework? Let me find my mouse again. Mouse disappeared. There we go. Oh, let's switch over. Nobody told me I wasn't showing my slides. So this is what I meant to show you a second ago, and of course I didn't do all my intro stuff. So that was when I was talking about my intro. That's what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you all of this, and then my shadow little thing got a little bit bigger. That's odd. Then that's what we're going to cover today: SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams, and then right above me we'll do your questions. But we're going to start with SharePoint Framework. So, State of the Union, where are we today? So, SharePoint Framework, the most recent version of the SharePoint Framework, is version 1.20. That was released, I believe it was late September, like September 26-ish, somewhere around there. Microsoft only talked about 3 things related to this release. But when I dug in, I found a whole lot more stuff. Just like I always do, the release notes are always light on stuff. So what did they talk about? So first and foremost, one thing that they gave us is that now we've always, not for always, but we've had for a long time the ability to create adaptive card extensions. These adaptive card extensions, otherwise known as ACEs, are composed of 2 main components. There's the card, and then there's the card view, and then when you click on the card view, you can open up what's called a quick view. The quick view, both of those have always been implemented using an adaptive card. The new thing that we can do now is the quick view can be either an adaptive card or it can be HTML. And the way we implement the HTML view is the same way we do with the web part, where we have like a reference to the DOM element where the adaptive card is rendered. What that means is we can shove our own HTML into that div instead of using an adaptive card for the quick view, which so far sure looks like it to me, that we could even add our own little React app that pops up in the quick view. So that's a cool additional capability. We also got additional data visualization chart options with the data visualization template. So initially, Microsoft only gave us these two options that you see right here. Let's see if I can get my pointer out, laser pointer. So we only had these two options here for line charts, either a simple one or where we could put up to 3 series in there and set the colors of them. We're no longer limited to that. Now we can also do a donut chart, a pie chart, and we can also do a bar chart. Those are the 3 other options that we have. The other thing that Microsoft announced was the fact that when they released 1.19, if you had an error in your code, a build time error, if you had an error in your code, you could run into this issue where you would have this, it would not show you the error. It would just say object. That's entirely useless. And it took Microsoft an entire release to fix it. In fact, my understanding was they were actually going to release 1.20 without fixing this. But thankfully, somebody at Microsoft put their foot down and said, nope, you're going to fix this when you do this release, before you do the release. So thankfully, they got it fixed. And so now that doesn't exist anymore. However, if you're not ready to go from 1.19 to 1.20, if you look at the article that I have linked up there on the slide, so just go to my site and you'll find that link, or if I can I copy that? Can't copy that off the top of my head. So I don't have the link entirely handy, but to drop in the chat. Actually, I can do that really fast though. If I can just find my browser. And let me come over here. And if you just go to my site, learn, articles, and right here, I'll drop this in the chat. Copy, paste. There we go. Drop that in. Cool. All right, so just drop that link in the chat. Did I? Yeah, there we go. So that's now available to you. You can learn how, if you wanted to, you could go like step by step on modifying your 1.19 project so that you wouldn't get this error anymore. There's a bunch of things you have to do, but I list them in that article. I found some other stuff though. First of all, one of the things that I found was, unfortunately, Microsoft did not update any of our dependencies, or for the most part, they updated one dependency, and that was the Microsoft Teams SDK that's included in the SharePoint framework. It's still about 3 months old compared to what we can do if they didn't include that SDK in the SharePoint framework. It's a very minor bump. I think it was like something like from, they included 2.24, version 2.24 in the SharePoint framework, and I think the most recent one is 2.28. They skipped 2.27, so it's 3 different updates that they added. Another thing they didn't do is they didn't update TypeScript. They didn't update React. They didn't update a bunch of stuff. Well, the good thing is that I figured out how you could do that though with TypeScript. So now with TypeScript, I have this article on my site, the link that I just dropped in the chat, that walks you through how you can upgrade your project from using TypeScript v4, which is what every SharePoint framework default project has today, and how you can make some changes very quickly to make it use TypeScript v5, which is great if you use a couple different tools, different packages and libraries that don't support TypeScript TypeScript v4, and they only support TypeScript v5. Another thing that I found was they made a bunch of changes around ESLint. They updated the version of ESLint, a pretty significant bump too, of minor versions. They went from like 2. Here, I can find it really fast. They went from, hold on. I just need to do a search, ESLint. They went from 8.7 to 8.57, so that's a pretty big jump. They also updated the configuration, the Rush Stack ESLint config package, and then they also went in and they deleted one section of rules from the default ESLint rules. Basically, there was a section that said, for like type definitions in TypeScript, the word Boolean with a capital B or a lowercase b is seen as valid. The SharePoint Framework team was like, no, you can't use capital B, which that's just completely arbitrary on their part. They deleted it. So great, but I wish they'd delete a lot more of the rules that they've defined as well and let us define our own rules for our own coding practices and not impose theirs. At any rate. Let's see, what else did I find? They made some changes to React templates as well. They kind of cleaned up some stuff that standardized it around all the React projects. But we're still stuck using class components and we're not using functional components, which is a major bummer. So it is what it is. Yeah, the one thing that I would tell you though, that this one really frustrates me is that for the most part, everything else with the SharePoint framework though, they still have got a lot of stuff that is still not current, that is still very old dependencies. TypeScript is really old, is still old. It's TypeScript version 4. React is version 17. When that's 4 years old. The last major version of React that was released was version 18. That was released 2 years ago. I don't understand why we're still not using that. I don't really care the fact that Microsoft has to update components to use a later version of React, but forcing developers to use the old stuff is ridiculous. You can't call yourself a platform if that's what you're doing, making us use old tech. It's like walking in, the analogy I gave in my article, oops, just lost my slides. The analogy I gave in my article for 1.20 I went through was like walking into a car dealership and they're telling you like, no, we don't have Bluetooth or USB ports in cars, but we do have this really cool CD cartridge thing that you can put in your trunk and to listen to your music. It's like, what? So that's still how it feels at any rate. Okay, so what's coming next with the SharePoint framework? I don't hold as much stock in these things anymore because it seems like this stuff always changes after the fact, and like stuff gets cut, stuff gets added. They just stop talking about it. I don't know. But what they've said is that you can expect the next version of SharePoint Framework coming in the next year, so not for another 4 months or so. It probably won't be early in January because they will still all be on vacation. Microsoft seems to just disappear for almost the entire month of December and part of January. They say they were going to get this new card web part for SharePoint, so it sounds like being able to have a web part and then give it an adaptive card. Okay. It sounds like this one right here about this, back up. This one right here, where they talk about SharePoint powered SP hosted apps. This sounds to me like they're addressing the isolated web part thing. This is what I've expected, or I suspected that they were going to do. And it sure does seem like they're doing it. What that sounds like is they announced earlier this year that isolated web parts were going away. And it sounded like to me they were doing that because they were getting rid of, they basically wanted people to stop using iframes. But it sounds like they're getting rid of isolated web parts, but we still will be able to do those inside of single page apps. The way that they worded this though about full page SPFx apps with unique app registration, I wonder if in the past when we had an isolated web part, they did the app registration for us and pinned it to that domain. I'd be curious to see if this is our responsibility for creating the app registration. Then do we then go to the Intra ID portal to go manage those permissions? This is going to be interesting to see what they're doing with this. But it looks like my theory was what they were going to be doing when they made the announcement that isolated web parts are going away. They said a little bit of, hey, we're working on something to address this to make it a little bit better. And my theory was, are we getting rid of full page apps as well that are isolated web parts, or can we at least do those as a single big iframe that's on the page running somewhere else? And then they stopped answering my questions. They went silent. So I was like, I think I gotcha. So when you go quiet, we'll see. And then, of course, it's not a Microsoft announcement if we don't have the word Copilot in there somewhere. So then they're saying SharePoint Framework and Copilot integration scenarios. That's all they said. So Sounds like someone was like going, cool. Did you talk about SharePoint? Did you talk about Copilot today? Check. Yes, I did that. Power card support for Viva connections. So Power Platform integration to the cards for enabling low code scenarios. Okay. We'll see what that means when it comes up. Okay. The other big things that we saw since we last got together was the Wave 2 announcements from Microsoft 365 Copilot. I don't have anything too much Teamsy related, but this is my Copilot kind of a thing that I do have. How do I get me out of the way? Let's put me over here for a sec. Okay. So what are the new names for this stuff? So we used to call Copilot in Microsoft 365, we called it Copilot for Microsoft 365. So you had things like Copilot for Word, Copilot for Excel, Copilot for this, for Windows, for whatever. And they finally were like, no. They're now going to call it BizChat. That is the main chat experience inside of when you go to Copilot and you're in the work mode, when you're able to leverage data in your Microsoft 365 tenant. They're now calling that BizChat, short for business chat. My joke was what? I mean, BizTalk, I guess that was also an orchestrator. So BizChat is the more trendy way to say BizTalk, but hey, we got AI. I don't know. So for those of you younger people who are watching this, BizTalk was a huge enterprise product from a long time ago where basically you took one XML document and you mapped it to another XML document. I'm not implying that's all you're doing in Copilot, but I just say it. Anyway, other ways you can look at this too is that its other product name that it's going to go by is Microsoft 365 Copilot or M365 Copilot. All right, that's the other names it's going to go by. They also got rid of the term for all of the extensibility stuff that we could do with Copilot. Back at the Build conference in 2024, we called that Copilot extensions or Copilot extensions. It is now Copilot agents. And so we no longer create our own little Copilots. We now create agents. And the big reason for this is that Microsoft was they saw the industry was using the term agents, an agent for most of the things that they were creating. Microsoft wasn't comfortable using that term. Honest to God, this is what they said. They weren't as comfortable using that. In fact, listen to the next Microsoft 365 developer podcast by Jeremy Thake. I joined him as a guest host. We went through all of this. That should come out the day of this office hours, or maybe tomorrow. So October 15th or 16th. It's going to be episode 316. So just keep an eye on that. That's one of the things I'm off to the side, like refreshing my browser to see if it's there yet, and it's not. There's the most recent episode is with me, with Jeremy, talking about SharePoint Embedded, but the next one's going to be something different about the Copilot announcements. They weren't comfortable calling their stuff agents yet because they weren't really agent-full, meaning they didn't go do stuff proactively for you. They weren't fully there. So, but they decided, you know what? That's what we're trying to get to, and we're going to get there. So instead of renaming it later, why don't we just rename it now and fix all the names in the code and the documentation and the manifest files and in the training and all of our announcements? Why don't we just call them agents now so that we don't have to do it again later? And like those of us that are long time like SharePoint people or Microsoft 365 people, I'm like, wait a minute. So a site collection is not going to be an SP site, or a site isn't going to be an SP web? I'm like, hallelujah. So anyway, or maybe you're a little bit younger than me, and you're like, I've been doing Teams app dev stuff. I build personal apps, but in the manifest, they're called static tabs. Or I build tabs for channels, but they're really called configurable tabs. So yeah, they've renamed the stuff for us now. There's some other stuff coming that you'll learn about with declarative agents and custom engine agents. You'll learn about those soon as well. We also talked about Copilot pages. Was also something that they announced, which is it's kind of funny. They sure look like Loop pages, but everybody I talked to like going, oh, so wait, Copilot integrates with Google Docs. Like, no, it's not Google Docs. It's Loop Pages, although it would have been cool if it did it with Google Docs, but that's okay. And then they also announced a bunch of other stuff with Copilot, new Copilot capabilities in other M365 apps. So things with Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, Teams, etc. There was a little bit of other stuff I wanted to throw out here about SharePoint Framework. They were pretty chatty about this. And then an ISV noticed something, and somebody from Microsoft responded, and we were all like, wait a minute, that's a completely deviates from the way you guys roll stuff out for everything else SharePoint that you've told us about for years. And the guy was basically like, I can't speak for support. I'll get some more information about it. And then he went quiet. Here's what's going on. And you take this for what it's worth. So I'm going to give you the facts. I'm going to give you my 2 cents. So first, the facts. Microsoft rolled out a new list UI, a new list user experience. You can tell you're getting the new list experience because the stuff that you get across the top of a list where you choose the different views, if it's got a tab kind of UI to it on the far right-hand side, that's the new UX. If it doesn't, that's the old UX. When the new UX rolled out, SharePoint Framework developers customizations like command set extensions and field customizers, none of them were working because the list team totally forgot, or sorry, didn't even know that they needed to do something about that. It was just like, yet again, like the right hand is not talking to the left hand, right? So I just got those reversed. I know my camera's kind of reversed here, but this is my right hand. So this is my left hand. This hand didn't talk to this hand, or vice versa. So they were like, oh shoot, let's stop that. So they rolled it back, and they changed it to where now, if you have a command set extension, SharePoint Framework command set extension, and or a field customizer extension on a list, you get the old SharePoint list experience with your extensions working. Otherwise, you get the new experience with them working. And then they're slowly kind of rolling things out to get the new stuff working. Then, this is still part of the facts, then in this issue that I have listed here, issue 9944, so the one I just described here, this is this is an Uber issue that got created that it basically made Microsoft aware of it. In this issue, 9944, this is when they announced how this new stuff was going to work and to give them feedback. And if you dig in a little bit, you'll see a thread, specifically a comment that somebody made. I think that one might be my follow-up, but you'll see another person named Shai. And apologies if I mispronounced your name. But he basically called out and said, we aren't seeing any of this stuff in first release. We're seeing it only in production. And the person from Microsoft said, yeah, we just pushed this stuff straight out to production. We're not using first release for this because we decided that we just wanted to go this way. And basically, he didn't say why, but they just said, this is the way it's working. And we started seeing a bunch of people piling on like, wait a minute, I thought a first release tenant was supposed to get all of the changes before everybody else. So I could have like a tenant. If I was an ISV, which this person Shai was, he runs a company, or he's a founder of, I think it's called KWiz, off the top of my head, if I'm right. It's in his GitHub profile, and I think it was KWiz. He said, or he, like people like them, right, or any other ISV, they usually have two tenants. They have a production tenant that's in the, I forget what it's called, but like the everything. And then there's a first release, which is stuff supposed to go to first release, and then it will make it to the main tenant. But you use first release to see if things are going to break before they go to everyone else. And so you can choose as an organization, do you want the latest and greatest, or do you want the stable stuff? And the latest and greatest, it's kind of like running on an early access thing, but it allows you to find issues either in your code or to make Microsoft aware of stuff. And if they're not even using first release anymore for changes like this, it was breaking a lot of stuff that they had been doing. So we called them out on it, like going, what the heck? I mean, this is totally different what you've been saying for years about first release. And Microsoft has made no comments about it since then, which is pretty pathetic. But yeah, so it's just frustrating. It just shows that you can only trust them so far with some of this stuff. Okay, let's tackle some questions here. So I've got 2 questions that were submitted ahead of time. Double check Discord. No new questions on Discord. Okay. All right. So let's go through our questions. So if you have a question, nobody's asking questions yet, please feel free to post it in the chat. I do see a question from earlier from Ryan. Ryan Sharista said that you're in Australia. You can't join at the time of live. Can you please help me with this issue with setting up local development environment for field customizer extension? And that's all I got. So there's nothing I can really go off from this. I'll come back to that question though, and I'll talk about some stuff that might answer your question, Ryan. But if not, I guess I'd say is drop it in the comments or for a future office hour. So I understand if you couldn't do it ahead of time, but let me go ahead and address the 2 questions I had submitted ahead of time first, because they submitted them early. Okay. First one is from Savvy. It said, I'm asking about something called Microsoft Intra External ID that he wanted to cover in this office hours. So first question is, what is this? I'll be completely candid. When I saw this, I was like, I don't know. What is that? I've never heard of that. But then the next question was, how do you use this for Microsoft 365 development purposes, more so for Teams development or for SharePoint embedded scenarios? Great question. So here's how this works. What Microsoft Intra has done is they have now created, think about it like this. So prior to what I'm going to talk about, we've been able to create Microsoft Intra ID tenants, right? We used to call them Azure AD tenants. Whenever you create a new Microsoft 365, tenant, you got a Intra ID tenant to go along with it, because that's where all your users and groups were going to be created and managed. And furthermore, you could also have apps that were created and registered inside of that tenant. We didn't have a special name for that, but we do now. Those are called workspace tenants. We now have a new type of a tenant that can get created in Microsoft Intra ID called an external tenant. And what an external tenant does is it's not tied to our organization. So that's a place where you could put like guest users, or not guest users to your tenant, but you could have people create their own accounts over there. You could have, it's basically a way for us to create our own way to create user accounts and apps and such. So, but it's treated just like any other tenant. It just doesn't have any access to any of the stuff inside of our Microsoft 365 tenant, for example. Whereas if you have a guest account and you invite a guest into your tenant, like for a Microsoft Teams meeting or a channel, they have access to that meeting. They have access to potentially that private channel in a team. Whereas these users from this external ID tenant doesn't exist. Okay, you can't do that. So Savvy's question was, well, how would you use this for a Microsoft 365 development purpose? So think of this as the way I understand this, and I've talked to 2 people about this from outside Microsoft, and I've asked a couple of questions inside Microsoft, but unfortunately I didn't get much of a response that really clarified this. But I'm pretty sure that what I'm saying is correct, but I have not created one of these yet, and so I haven't really had a chance to really test it out and to see how it works. To our understanding is that I can create one of these Intra ID tenants, which is this is where I could put all of my customers, okay? I could configure that tenant to support third-party auth that has been federated, like for example, using Meta or Facebook, using Google for like Gmail account type thing. So basically also allowing these other third-party providers that I trust that I configure to go log in as a federated partner into this Intra ID external tenant. Okay, now how can I use that? It's really no different than if I created an app inside of my workspace tenant, inside of my Microsoft 365 tenant. If I create, which is a workspace tenant, if I created an app over there and I said that this app can be multi-tenant, meaning it can be used by people who are logging in from outside of this workspace tenant. So if I made that app as a multi-tenant app, then I could then in the code, when someone goes to authenticate with it, I could check to see who the identity provider was. And if that identity provider is the GUID of my external tenant, then my customers could use this app. So the way I understand this is that for a SharePoint, and let's think SharePoint embedded. If I build a SharePoint embedded app, that app has to be registered inside of my tenant. Okay? Because it's going to be using, it's going to be tied to an Azure subscription. It's going to be tied to a container type, etc. That app can be used by my tenant and any other. And if I make it multi-tenant, it can then be used by any other tenant. And in the code, and there's probably a way to do this too in the Intra ID management, portal management. I don't know how you would do it, but I would guess that there's probably a way to do this. But even if not, in the code, when a user goes and authenticates and try with the external Intra ID tenant, and I get that token as part of my app, I can look at the token that I receive, validate it, which I had an article where I explained how to do that. Let me pull that article up, just paste a link to it in the chat. Oh, don't want to do that. Let me grab that article real fast. Where's that article? That one. So let me put this in the chat. Cool. On how to validate a token. So you can validate the token is legit, came from Intra ID, and then I can open the token up and look at the claims. And one of the claims is the issuing authority, which that would be contain the tenant ID of my external tenant. Even if they were signing in using a Google account into that tenant, they'd be created as an account inside that tenant. And so when that tenant would be the one that would be giving me the access token, and my code for my Intra ID app can look at that and say, yeah, we're still good with this. So by being multi-tenant, it says any other tenant could use this. And then my code can make sure that I check and see only specific tenants would be allowed to use it. So Savvy, that's how I understand this to work, as are two other people who are very knowledgeable in the in the Microsoft 365 and Azure security space. That is how we all understand this should work. I was trying to get to connect with the SharePoint embedded team, because I think that's a great example of how this could be used. But I couldn't get anybody to respond back to me, honestly. But that was also while they were doing these two remote events in New York City and in London in the last couple of weeks. So I was having a hard time connecting with them. So, but it should work. Okay, second question was from Michael. So Michael, or Mike, it was Michael, wasn't it? Why did I say Mike? No, it is Mike. Sorry. Make sure I say your name right. I hate it when people say my name wrong and call me Andy. So I'm going to get you right. I want to make sure I didn't shorten your name without you shortening it. Mike said, his question was essentially around Microsoft Graph and using middleware for Microsoft Graph. So Microsoft Graph has the ability to allow us to customize how the client works by adding in our own middleware. So we could do things like add in our own logging provider, or maybe some caching provider that we want to be able to cache stuff ourselves. And he's like, well, how do you go about doing this? I can't figure out how to do this. And so I'm giving you two links here, but I want to talk a little bit about this as well. So first of all, the first link that I'm giving you is a link to the docs inside of the the JavaScript SDK for Microsoft Graph, on how you can go through and configure it. And it shows an example of how to do this. The second link is from a Microsoft cloud developer advocate named Waldeck Mastercars. about how you could go through and do the exact same thing. His article is a little bit better than the docs because it actually gives you gives you a full-blown scenario of how you would do it. Now, neither of those address like the SharePoint framework. And I don't know if you're asking about the SharePoint framework, Mike, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. So the idea is that when you work with the Microsoft Graph, so let me pull up Microsoft Graph. Oh, here, hold on. You guys gotta tell me when I'm switching to the screen here. So this was the question. Forgot there. So there's the question that this is the question that that Mike asked, and those are the two links. So leave those out there for a second, but let me come back over here and let me go to init client. All right. So right here. So when you want to go use the Microsoft Graph and you want to be able to leverage the, and you want to be able to, when you go to use the Microsoft Graph JavaScript client, or the other clients work the same way. Here, what I've done is I've imported the client onto this, onto the current page, and then I'm setting up a credential, and then I'm setting up an auth provider using that credential with the scopes that I want. And then I'm saying client.init with middleware, the auth provider. Okay. Now, the other way that you can do this initialization like this is you just say client.init and you pass in the auth provider. So you don't actually pass in any additional middleware with this. The way you would do it by going through and defining your own middleware is you would say you're going to initialize a client with middleware, and you pass in the array of all the middleware that you want to end up using. And then there's docs in the Graph SDK, depending on what language you're using, or what if you're using .NET or JavaScript or whatever. It explains to you how you build your own middleware components and how you then like order them and how you want them to show up using this init with client middleware. Thought I just saw another question pop up. So when we look at the SharePoint framework, we don't have to call this client.init. That's what's being done for us by the Microsoft framework, the SharePoint framework class, the MS Graph Client v3. So effectively what it's doing under the covers is it's going out to Entra ID, getting an access token for Graph, creating this auth provider and passing in the token as part of the credential. And it's then giving us, and then it's calling that init to give us the Graph client that we can then use in our SharePoint framework project. So the answer to you, Mike, is if you're doing this for the SharePoint framework, you are not, to the best of my knowledge, the SharePoint framework SDK for the Microsoft Graph does not expose the initialization stuff. It does it internally. So instead, what I would do then, if I were you, is number one, you go build out your middleware, following the docs in the Graph SDK, in the Graph documentation. So if I did like, let me grab that link here. So github.com, if I can type github.com/Microsoft Graph, MS Graph SDK. Yep, there it is. So this kind of walks through how you would create like a logging handler. So you implement middleware and you see you have an execute method and a set next method. And then here's another one that you're creating here. But then to chain them all together, you then have your, once you have, so then this is the auth middleware right here. And then you got your logging handler, and then you got the next handler that I just skipped a second ago. So first is we're creating client options, the middleware we're defining. Sorry, let me back up. You see here that we're creating our auth handler. The next thing it does is it runs logging, and then logging, the next thing it does is it runs set the HTTP message handler. And then you do client.init with middleware and pass in all of those options as a list of all the middleware that you want to use. So first when you pass in his authentication handler, he's been configured to then run logging, and he's then been configured to run this message handler. So you kind of chain things along in that middleware. You don't have the ability to do this in the SharePoint framework using the Graph client. Instead, what you would do is use the stuff that we have for the Azure AD client to go get an access token. And then once you have that access token, you will then initialize the client yourself and also define your own middleware. So you have to set up the authentication handler as part of your middleware. And then what you can do by getting an access token, and there's code in the JavaScript docs for this. There's code in the Graph SDK for JavaScript that shows you how to do that. And then you just want to take it to the next level and say, now I want to go through and add in my own middleware components. So I don't have the code that shows doing that. Waldeck's article, I'll drop these in the chat though. So there's one, and then Waldeck was, I went to that earlier, so that should be my history. Blog.waldeck. Oh, Masti, M-A-S, there it is. Like that. Let's see if he has the code there for it. I don't know if he has a code for it, but I'm just going to keep moving along here. But I think that's enough to kind of get you going in the right direction, Mike. So I think that's hopefully that helps and gets you a little bit unblocked there, Mike. Sorry, I don't have any more like code off the top of my head that does it. I haven't had a need for doing this, but you can do this. It's totally supported. I just don't think you can do it with the out-of-the-box SDK we have in the SharePoint framework. You instead are going to have to go get the token from using the Azure AD client, and then you will go use the Graph JavaScript SDK, but you're going to include that yourself and initialize it yourself. The thing that the SharePoint framework does is it automatically initializes it. It does that process on our behalf. It goes and gets the token and it initializes the client and then gives that back to us in a SharePoint framework project. You just have to do that yourself so you can get access to where you define the middleware. Okay. So I've answered all the questions that we had. So now let me go back through the chat and let me answer a couple questions here. And I see one from, I can't tell, somebody didn't put their name in there. So let me come back. Okay, Ryan asked about setting up a local environment for field customizer extensions. I don't know if you're asking, how do I test a field customizer locally, like in the workbench, in the hosted workbench, in the local workbench? That's kind of what it sounds like. And the answer is you can't. The only way you can test a field customizer is with an existing list. You can't use any of the hosted workbenches or any of the local workbench that's no longer around, or even the hosted workbench. Instead, what you end up doing is you create a field customizer, you have it running locally, and then you craft a URL using the way that I show you in my class, and is also in the docs, actually. You don't have to buy my class for this, although I'd love it if you buy my class. I'll give you a discount. I'll give you 20% off. That will, you basically tell the SharePoint framework to, when you get to the list, load the page or load the SharePoint framework. Here's where you'll find the code for my field customizer. And I want you to use my field customizer on this specific column on the list on this page. And it just swaps it out. That way you don't have to go through and to create a site column when you're testing it out, right? So that totally does it. I think that's what you're asking. I can't really tell because you just said that, how do I set up a local environment for a field customizer extension? I need a little bit more info on that. And unfortunately, you're not joining us live. So, but if you submit the question, I can definitely be more prepared to answer your question more completely for our next office hours. Let's see. So this next question is from OV Online. Says, thank you very much for the information you regularly provide about SharePoint Framework. It's really interesting and helpful. Awesome. Thank you very much for the feedback. I appreciate that. Tell your friends they should join us. Your question was, do you think that in the future Microsoft will replace Webpack and Gulp with Vite to have fast development experience? Man, I wish they would, but I'll be completely frank. Microsoft has shown, or the SharePoint engineering team has the one thing they're consistent on is not really giving the dev tooling much love. And I don't really have much confidence when they say that they're going to refresh it. They said last year in 2023 that they were looking to like make some improvements with the dev tooling. I hadn't seen crap. So to be honest, I mean, I don't trust what they say. I've heard him say stuff like that again recently. And I was like, I'd love to see it and I'd love to give you feedback and I got some ideas and I'd love to help. And it's like crickets. So do I think they're going to do it? No. They've said they're going to do it, but I don't know if they're going to. They haven't said they're going to do Vite. They've just said that we're working on some stuff, right? And they haven't said that even like, that's not even, they haven't said, they just general kind of stuff like that to where they kind of acknowledge that, yes, there's some stuff that they need to do to fix them, to get some things a little bit better. Like, for example, the way that they've got their tooling all set up today with their dependency tree, it doesn't make it easy for them to upgrade to the version of React. It doesn't make it easy for them to upgrade the version of TypeScript. It doesn't make it easy for them to upgrade other parts of the tool chain because of all these dependencies that they've taken a dependency on from other teams throughout Microsoft who are also slow about making their updates. By doing that, you're basically handcuffing yourself to whatever somebody else decides. So to me, it's unnecessary for them to make those kind of requirements. Personally, I'd like to see them completely scrap this whole yeoman and this yeoman generator approach. I'd love to see them get rid of Gulp. I'd love to either be doing everything with Webpack or be using Vite or something like that. I agree with you. That's the approach that I'd like to see. The only thing that we have to build is a JavaScript bundle that has specific methods that are implemented on it. That's it. It would not take it's not rocket science or anything super complicated to create a new developer tooling that would generate projects that just simply spit out a JavaScript bundle. I would love to go through and to take the time to build something out. I've got like a spec that I've kind of like written up about here's how it would work. That would be super simple. It wouldn't because I don't think that they would end up actually building it. So I don't know how many people would actually end up have interest in using something that is not from Microsoft. So I just don't have the interest in exerting that effort today because it's a significant undertaking. And as much as I would like to do it on an academic point of view, I mean, you've also got to pay the bills. So for this one project, not really interested. And I'm really not interested about putting into doing something like that as a patterns and practices project because I think this is something that should not be owned by Microsoft. And Microsoft has already shown that they influence and control patterns and practices stuff. Like when they ripped out the impact that we recently had about the PMP management shell and the CLI, just shows that they can make those changes and still impact stuff. And I would not want to work on a community project that does that. I'm not finding fault with the other ones. Me personally, I'm not interested in doing it. So great question. I feel your pain. I'm right along there with you. Do I think they're going to do it? Nope. No. I'd love to be proven wrong, but they got to prove it to me that they actually show an interest to actually modernize our tooling for the SharePoint framework for me to actually buy into it. They've talked about it so much, nothing's ever come of it. So I don't really trust it. Not a great story, but I'm just being honest. Another question about 20 minutes ago from someone who did not give me their name, so I don't know who you are, but they said, we'll just call them anonymous. So anonymous said, on provider hosted apps, making the switch be as easy as registering the MVC app service with a new client ID and secret, and then use that for SSO, no longer needing app registration. I think you're asking about the single page app thing that I was talking about earlier that Microsoft said that they're working on. I mean, what you describe is basically how it kind of works in Teams, where your app runs somewhere else, like your MVC app that you mentioned, and it lives inside of an iframe, and you create your own app registration. You still have to create an app registration because you have to have a client ID and a secret for your own app. You have to have an app registration. to get a client ID and a secret, you get that from an app registration. So there's no other way around that. And you're not going to be able to get the secret from the SharePoint Online registration, nor would I really think you want to use that because you want to have individual permissions. So, not sure. Let's see. So Anchor, your question was, you always deliver some great information. Thanks for the updates. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Tell your friends. It would be great if you can share some insight on what code coverage test for SharePoint Framework 1.8 and 1.18 and higher. And what about compatibility issue with just JUnit? So I did see somebody just popped in. They said, that's missed a twist to you. I appreciate what you said in your comment. I have no idea who you are based on that name. So Anchor, so I don't have a recommendation for you today. I'm not sure what you mean by a code coverage test for 1.18 and higher. I've been meaning to do this, and this has been way back on my backlog, and I don't know when I'm going to get to it. I was putting it off for a while because I was waiting to see Microsoft update to the later version of TypeScript, and when they didn't, I took it upon myself to go do it and make sure it would work. Because the biggest challenge that we've been having has been the fact that we've been stuck on an old version of TypeScript, version 4.7. which dictates the version of Jest we can use because it dictates the version of TS Jest that we can use, which is the preprocessor for Jest that lets Jest understand TypeScript versus the fact that it only knows JavaScript. So what you have to do is you have to use a preprocessor for Jest to do the pre-processing of the TypeScript before it gets to Jest for Jest to run the test code. You have to find a version of TS Jest that supports the version of TypeScript that you're using in your project for the SharePoint Framework 1.18, 1.19, 1.20 has been TypeScript version 4.7. That is a very old version of TS Jest. You then take the version of TS Jest that you use and you map that. You take that version and that dictates which version of Jest you can use. Okay, that's not a big deal. I do that in my class, in my Mastering the SharePoint Framework class. The last time I did it was for SPFx 1.15. I need to do it for TypeScript 4.7 and also 5.3. Now that I've shown you through the link that I shared earlier in the chat that I figured out how to use a newer version of TypeScript with the SharePoint Framework. It's not supported by the SharePoint Framework team, but as far as I can tell, it looks like it works just fine. Once you've done that, then your question about insight on code coverage tests, that's just a configuration in your Jest configuration. Because once you've got that set, you're good to go. The thing that's held me up from doing this is that all of the Jest stuff that I've done, all of the automated testing stuff that I've done with the SharePoint framework also involves testing React apps. And in the past, I've always used a tool called Enzyme to handle the rendering part of React. The Enzyme was built by Airbnb and was made open source for anybody to use. However, Airbnb announced that they would no longer be investing in it after React version 18. Okay, so you could argue with the SharePoint framework, that's great, we're on old React, so it doesn't matter. We're still on 17. And even if they upgrade, they'll upgrade to 18. And then it'll take another 4 years, and we'll go through another pandemic before we get to have to deal with it again. Hopefully not, but anyway, the approach that I am more in favor of these days now is get rid of Enzyme and use a library called a testing library, which is much more popular and addresses a lot of the challenges that we had with Enzyme and the usage issues that we had related to Enzyme. So with that being said, I think it's on my list of things to go back and to figure out and to get my chapter or my course updated for that. I don't have a recommendation for you today. I recognize it's a challenge, and it's something I want to do, but I also know this is not a trivial task. This takes a good amount of time to go back and do the research and to find the right matrix of all of the versions that you need. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, I'm no longer doing this for Enzyme. I think you should do this with testing library. The challenge is that if I do that, I have to go re-record that entire testing piece that I did in my course. And I frankly have not had the time to go back and do that. So that's the reason that's held me up from doing this, is because it kind of opens up the door to a couple other tasks that I have to do. So it's tricky. So at any rate, anyway, that's what it is. So with that, we're kind of ending the time here. I guess all I would say is, Anchor, keep an eye out on stay on my newsletter. If you're not on my newsletter, make sure you subscribe to it, because it is something that is on my backlog that I want to go get figured out and sorted, and have some code samples that show you how this stuff works. I saw the follow-up response from That's Mista Twista to You. Great name. You're one of the SharePoint Framework course people. So great. Thank you very much for getting my course. I really appreciate that. Again, I don't know how you are. You say it's super useful stuff. You wish you could write more code for projects. Your current employer is really smart about going low code over pro code to begin with. I don't know if that's being sarcastic or not. I don't think that it's I think that people going, no, we do everything low code, no code. We don't go with code, so we're in a much better shape. My attitude on it is, if you go extreme, if you say I'm going to do everything with code or I'm going to do everything with no code, both of you are wrong. The fact is, one tool is great for a lot of scenarios. The other tool is great for a lot of other scenarios. There is an overlap in that Venn diagram, and then it's kind of up to you on what you do. I think that people that say, we only do this or we only do this, I think you're missing the boat. And if that's the way you look at stuff, then I think that I would just take a step back and say, why don't you pick the tool that's the right thing for the problem, instead of just, this is the tool we're going to use because this is what we use. I've got a great hammer, but not everything is a nail. So anyway, all right, that's it for this month. Keep in mind, we changed up our regular schedule. It is now on the third Tuesday of the month. The next one of these that we do is going to be on November the 19th. I've already set this up inside of Discord to where you can go in and set up you can download the ICS file for your calendar. I have also set up the YouTube live item for this. Within a couple hours, I'll have the links updated, the short link updated. So when you go to vtns.io, tns.io/office-hours, just like I put in the chat just now, when you go to https://vtns.io/office-hours, it will redirect you to the next one that's coming up. Right now, it's pointing to today's. In a couple hours, it'll be updated to point to the very next one. So with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Make sure you stay tuned. If you're not on my newsletter, you want to be on my newsletter, because the next issue is a big one, and do a lot of announcement stuff. Not announcements from Voitanos, but we dig into a lot of stuff from somebody else who's doing a big announcement soon. That's going to be a big deal for a lot of us in the 365 space. I got a little preview into it, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with all of you. Great. That's it. Everyone, have a great rest of your week. Thank you very much for joining me. Bring your friends next time. I know we do office hours. We only see less than 20 people show up for these live ones. A lot of people watch them recorded. Love to see more people showing up live. I'd love to be all just Q&A, but all good. Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.